it's interesting, this, I don't like the idea of history having a color, like black history or white history or this history or that history. I believe that people of all different colors and ethnic origins made significant contributions to our nation. Unfortunately, some are overlooked, maybe because it's the generals and the admirals, when it comes to a war, they get most of the recognition. The foot soldiers, the sergeants, and I was a sergeant, they don't usually make a whole lot of history. On occasions, like a Sergeant York, you know, World War I, we may know about him, you know. Sergeant Snorkel, Beetle Bailey cartoon, we know about him. But for the most part, the sergeants and the privates don't get a lot of recognition. And unfortunately, a lot of the black patriots don't get a whole lot of recognition. Now, when I mentioned I don't like the idea of black history, look at Black History Month. It's the shortest month of the year. Isn't that an insult? I don't need the government to tell me when I should celebrate significant contributions made by great Americans, of whatever color they are. It was interesting too, I grew up in the Hyde Park section of Boston. I lived through the forced busing era, which was a pretty ugly time to be a student in the school. And I took a black history course. It was an elective. I was the only white person in there. And the teacher was great. She was also my history teacher, so I really enjoyed learning a whole lot. But I've learned in my travels throughout the region, I always, my eyes open, and even in places like Jaffrey, New Hampshire, there's a very interesting story of a man named Amos Fortune, which I won't get into. That's something you may want to look him up. And in Vermont, Alexander Twilight, the very first man of color to be elected in the United States. This was back in the 1820s, and he was a phenomenal man, a minister, a pastor, who built a school with his bare hands, which still stands today. Now, I lived in, again, a Hyde Park section of Boston, and we have an interesting history too, because in the Hyde Park section of Boston, the 54th Regiment trained there in Camp Meigs. I took Reverend Kraft there when he spends time with me. I think I'm going to declare him as a dependent because he spends a lot of time in my house when we have him up here in the Boston area. The 54th Regiment was the first all-black, they used the term Negro Regiment, to fight in the Civil War, and they trained just a few miles from my home. I think I had Mr. Moore with me, and we did a video in front of the last standing building. A lot of Americans, black or white, know very little about this history. And then the history of the Amistad was an incredible story. They made a movie out of it, and sometimes Hollywood gets it really wrong, but it's not so bad. It was a really good story. And interesting thing is, why did they come to Connecticut in the 1830s? Because Connecticut was still a slave state. Most people don't realize that. So anyway, this class will be dealing with patriots, black heroes of the American Revolution. I just want to mention a few books. They're not for sale. I don't have extra copies. This book was originally published in the 1850s, and I bought this at the African Meeting House. African Meeting House is the oldest church, still exists. Now the congregation is no longer in its location, but the church still exists in Boston. It's now a museum, and it is actually it's part of the federal park system. And of course, a meeting house 200 years ago meant church, when you hear the word meeting house. And again, it was written by, it's still in print, it was written by a black man, William Cooper Nell. Phenomenal book, and I learned a whole lot, and I'm going to share some of the things. This is a book that I picked up in Concord last Wednesday. This is more for younger children, Black Heroes of the American Revolution. Now, there was a man, I wanted to bring Mr. Charlie Price, who portrays Prince Estabrook, but he wasn't available. I was going to bring him here, and he's a member of the Lexington militia, which is an honorary entity. And this book was published, I think, about 2001. I actually had an autographed copy of the author, who's now deceased. So these are excellent books to learn more about the story. So that's the copy of the book here. This is another book. This is actually published by the U.S. government park system. It lists, there was between 3,000 to 5,000 black Americans that fought on the side of the colonists in the Revolutionary War. There were some blacks that fought for the British too, by the way. But Prince Estabrook is someone that I really, he answered the alarm in Lexington, and all of us walked on the green today where he walked. He was actually a slave, and it says the official story was a Minuteman private, but we learned today there really wasn't a Minuteman unit. They were just a regular militia unit. I'll have to correct that. who fought and was wounded at the Battle of Lexington. Now, how many people were killed at the Battle of Lexington? How many Americans? 8. And how many were wounded?
10.
There were 10, and one of them was Prince Estabrook. Now, keep in mind, he was a slave, but here he was answering the alarm, facing the most powerful force in the world, the British Army at that time, and he got wounded. Now, I take my family to the reenactments. It's usually that's Patriots Day, that closest Monday to the original April 19th. Sometimes it falls on April 19th. And Charlie Price, this gentleman here, he's 81 now, and every year he falls down and lays on the green, so people can understand his great appreciation. An undated broadside from the time identified him as a Negro man, spelled his name Easterbrooks, and listed him among the wounded from Lexington. Born around 1741, he was a slave belonging to the family of Benjamin Estabrook, from whom he most likely took his name. He was from the Lexington militia, commanded by Captain John Parker, the first to engage the British at Lexington. It's interesting, too, that about 100 years later, the military was segregated. It was segregated up until a little after World War II. But it wasn't segregated back here. Whites and blacks fought and bled in the same unit. So it's interesting how things happen. In fact, in Pennsylvania, blacks were able to vote up until 1850 when they had a Constitutional State Convention, and they took away the right to vote. They took away the right to vote from men who actually fought for our country. The Essex Register of 25th April 1775 lists Prince Estabrook, a Negro man of Lexington, as having been wounded by the British troops at some time during the battles of Lexington and Concord. He enlisted in the Lexington militia in 1773 and served in the army on and off until 1783. So he not only was a member of the militia, he actually served in the Continental Army. And he served in New York, and we're talking about 7 years of service. And what you say on and off, what they would do sometimes is they do 6 months enlistments, go back to the farm, plant the crop, or whatever they do, and then take care of business, and then re-enlist and go back and serve. That's what a lot of them, in fact, my ancestor, who was a direct ancestor of mine, I think he had 5 enlistments. And that's typical what he did. Now, some of you saw this plaque that when we went to the tavern in honor of Prince Estabrook. So many people, at least people on my tour, right? And that was put there in 2008. He was honored in 2008 by the city of Lexington with a monument erected in front of the Buckman Tavern as being the first black combatant of the American Revolution and for representing the thousands of blacks who fought for their country. In honor of Prince Estabrook was a slave who lived in Lexington at dawn. This is on the plaque, by the way. At dawn on April 19, 1775, he was one of the Lexington Buckman Tavern in the battle which followed. Prince Estabrook was wounded on Lexington Green. Through circumstances and destiny, he thus became the first black soldier to fight in the American Revolution. This monument is dedicated to the memory of Prince Estabrook and the thousands of other courageous black patriots long denied the recognition they deserve. Donated by Alice Hinckley Memorial, she's the author of the book, Fund, April 21st, 2008. This is his gravesite. Now, we didn't have a chance to visit. Maybe next year. I would love to lay a wreath for Camp Constitution, to lay a wreath to remember this great patriot. He was buried in the town of Ashby. He wasn't a pauper's grave, but the Daughters of the American Revolution moved his site. Boy, they do a lot of great work, don't they, the DAR? They do a lot of great work. And my family, when we travel from Boston up in the area, especially for camp, we like to stop and pay our respects. Now, there's a lot of other people that also served in this gravesite, but at the cemetery too. In fact, we were in the cemetery a couple of years ago, and there's some tourists from the Midwest. They thought all the stones were not true, like all reproductions. I said, no, people died here from the 1700s. Yo, this is real. This is New England now. You're going to see a lot of that stuff. Now, there was when we got off the bus in Concord, you might have seen a little house. We didn't have time. We were kind of a tight schedule. That house was moved there recently, and it's the home of Caesar Robbins. Now, he is a very interesting man. Enslaved at birth in 1745 in neighboring Chelmsford, which is just a few towns away. Caesar Robbins served in the French and Indian War, at the age of 16. And by the way, there were people in their 10, 11 years old that served. Mr. Tregenza was, no, he wasn't in the Navy when he was 10, 11, but he was on Old Ironsides, and they had powder monkeys. How old were the powder monkeys? They were
generally, as you say, 10, 11,
10, 11 years old. How many people want to serve on a battleship at 10 or 11? Yeah. 8-year-old. 8-year-old. I think that's a little too young to be fighting myself. But anyway, so he served in the French and Indian War at the age of 16. His owner received his payment on April 19th, 1775. Oh, by the way, Prince Estabrook did get his freedom after he served, so he did become a free man. The first day of the Revolutionary War, he likely served at the North Bridge in Captain John Robbins' acting company. Now, the North Bridge was the Concord Bridge that we saw. By 1776, he was with the forces that fortified Dorchester Heights. That's actually in South Boston. And that was one of Washington's first victories. It's not considered a victory. It was a siege, but there was some gun exchange. But the British didn't want to fight. They were completely surrounded, and they withdrew. And we celebrate that March 17th as Evacuation Day, also St. Patrick's Day. But in Boston, it's Evacuation Day and St. Patrick's Day. He marched off to Fort Ticonderoga as part of Captain Zachary Fitch's company. He was probably emancipated, it means he was freed, before or at the time of his enlistment. He settled in Concord, married twice, and had 6 children. 2 of his grown children, Susan and Peter, became the first residents of this newly built house. And this is the house. This is the house. I don't know if you remember seeing that or not. Again, we had a tight schedule. We'd still be there if we were doing everything I wanted to do. See. Now, this is a very interesting person because I'd never heard of this. There was a black militia in Boston during the Revolutionary War. That was very interesting to me. I should have known that. So anyway, Colonel George Middleton. Now, there's not a lot of history about this. And that might be something, and maybe somebody in this room can look into that. Middleton was one of 5,000 African Americans to serve in the military on the Patriots side of the Revolutionary War. Although scant evidence survives about his military service, Colonel Middleton, now he's called Colonel, he may have been the first officer, a black officer. Served as commander of the Bucks of America, a Boston-based unit of the Massachusetts militia. Few details have survived about the Bucks, only one of 2 all-black Patriot units in the war. After the war, Governor John Hancock, that's the guy that signed the Declaration of Independence, that's the guy that was in that house that you saw, right? Honored Colonel Middleton and his company by presenting him with a flag to commemorate their service. The flag still exists and is owned by the Massachusetts Historical Society, which I happen to be a member of that. Middleton House, built in 1797, right in Boston, and oh, I should have had the photo. The house still stands, by the way. So this was interesting. The company was celebrated in Boston after the American Revolution ended. Governor John Hancock and his son, John George Washington Hancock, gee, I wonder who he named his son after, huh? Presented the company with a white silk flag featuring a leaping buck and a pine tree, the symbol of New England. And by the way, do you know why the pine tree was a symbol of New England? It was kind of a, well, who owned all the pine trees when the British were in control? The king. What did he do with the biggest pine trees? Took it back to England for mast, right? You better not cut any of his pine trees down. And so that's why the pine tree was there as a sign of defiance. It is believed to have been made in Boston and presented about 1789 to the military company. A medallion was also made for the military group to commemorate their service. It is a silver planchet of 13 stars above it. The Bucks of America, organized in Boston, was the name given to, I read that, here we go. So that's what the flag looked like. Now, how many people have seen this flag before? This is incredible history. Incredible history. And anyone seen it? Oh, I'm sorry. I'm blocking. Here we go. And this was given to him by John Hancock. Oh, and this is his house. I got a chance to visit. I mean, I live in Boston, and I'm in downtown Boston. Beacon Hill is the very kind of a expensive area to live today. But back then, on one side of it, I guess it was sort of it was a black neighborhood, you know, where the church, where the meeting house is, and Colonel Middleton's home today. Salem poor. Now, I had an ancestor, not a direct ancestor, but I had an ancestor that fought at, two brothers that fought at Bunker Hill. They may have known this man, possibly. Salem poor was a slave owned by John Poor. Many New England families treated their slaves as live-in servants and near family members. And Salem poor purchased his freedom in 1769 for 27 pounds, a fairly large sum at the time. He was married in 1771, and a son was born in late 74, 75. And you'll see a stamp. Can you see the stamp in his honor for the philatelist among us? There were several blacks, by the way, that served. There was Salem Poor and Peter Salem. Even though he had proven his loyalty and his bravery during the Battle of Bunker Hill, Salem Poor was almost released from the American forces because of the fear the Continental Congress had of arming slaves. During the battle, of course, by this time he was free. During the Battle of Charleston, which is Bunker Hill, he fought on the day in 1775. Poor is credited with killing British Lieutenant Colonel James Abercrombie. His gallant service prompted 14 white officers to send a petition on his behalf to the General Court of Massachusetts. The petition read in part, "We declare that a Negro man called Salem Poor, Colonel Fry's regiment, in the late Battle of Charlestown, behaved like an experienced officer as well as an excellent soldier. We would only beg leave to stay in the person of this Negro brave and gallant soldier. The reward due to so great and distinguished a character, we submit to the Congress. Salem Poor earned commendation for his outstanding leadership and valor. Continuing his service, he served in the brutal and deadly winter at Valley Forge, in which many of General George Washington's men either starved, froze to death, or deserted. Poor also served at White Plains, New York." And this actually is a famous painting. And there you will see Salem Poor, right here, featured in this painting. Prince Whipple of Portsmouth, New Hampshire. Prince Whipple was born in Ghana of comparatively wealthy parents. Whipple is one of the signers of the Declaration of Independence, and he was once entrusted by the general with a large sum of money to carry from Salem to Portsmouth. He was attacked on the road near Newburyport, which is in Massachusetts, by two ruffians. One was struck with a loaded whip, the other one shot. You don't mess with Prince. Prince was beloved by all who knew him. He was also known as Caleb Quantum of Portsmouth, where he died leaving a widow, Dinah, a free person, and two children. According to the Portsmouth, New Hampshire town records, General Whipple granted Prince Whipple the rights of a free man on 22nd February 1781. Prince's wedding that day, he was legally manumitted by General, that means freed, Whipple on 26th of February 1784. He fought in the battles of Saratoga and in Delaware during the War for Independence. His owner, George Whipple, was a signer of the Declaration of Independence and an aide to General George Washington. Although Whipple has been identified by some as the African-American figure in the familiar painting of Washington crossing the Delaware River, it is doubtful that he was present on Christmas Eve. Now, we've seen this painting. This actually was the kind of boat they used, and nobody is dumb enough to stand up when big pieces of ice are coming down the river. And I don't think it was that icy. It doesn't usually get icy in Delaware, even back then. Global warming, I guess, right? So I think, yeah, this is the gentleman right here. And I've just read, and by the way, this man here, that's James Monroe, later became president of the United States. So I think he was actually in the boat, but I don't think he was standing up at that time. They were trying to be a little secretive, so they weren't doing things like that. And it was dark, but it's still a great painting. And there's his gravesite in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, and you see some of these plaques. A lot of these groups like Sons of the American Revolution like to honor these people. And I guess that's all I have. 20 minutes, all right, Rev, you're up.
Thank you.